Commander Jack Miller stared at the message on his screen. His hands gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. The Zarnian Dominion had finally done it. After years of tense relations, they had issued an ultimatum to humanity. Surrender all colonies beyond Sol in 7 days or face total extinction. Jack closed his eyes for a moment. The Zarnians had conquered 17 other alien species. Their energy weapons could cut through Earth's best ships like paper. Their shields had never been penetrated. How could humanity possibly stand against such power? Commander Miller, Admiral Woods requests your presence in the war room immediately, his assistant said through the intercom. Tell him I'm on my way, Jack replied, straightening his uniform. Across the solar system on Europa, Dr. Susan Taylor watched as her team scrambled around the laboratory. The call from Earth Command had come just 20 minutes ago. Her project, known only as the Prometheus Protocol, needed to be ready not in 6 months as planned, but in less than 1 week. Dr. Taylor, the new power calculations are ready, said her assistant, handing her a tablet. Susan studied the numbers and frowned. These energy requirements are impossible with our current setup. We'd need 3 times the capacity of the entire Europa grid. Then what do we do? Susan looked at the experimental apparatus in the center of the lab, the culmination of 15 years of theoretical work based on strange equations found in ancient ruins on Mars. We redesign it, call everyone back from their stations, and get me a direct line to Admiral Woods. On Earth, Admiral Henry Woods faced a room full of scared government officials. The emergency meeting of Earth's unified government had devolved into panic. We can't possibly surrender our colonies. Millions of people would be displaced, shouted one representative. And billions will die if we fight this hopeless war, countered another. Admiral Woods raised his hand for silence. There may be another option. Dr. Taylor's team on Europa has been working on a project that might give us a fighting chance. What kind of project could possibly help against the Zarnians? Asked the European representative skeptically. One based on technology far older than humanity, Woods replied. Technology we've only begun to understand. In New Houston, Sam Martinez packed a small bag. The military transport would arrive in 30 minutes to take him to the spaceport. He looked at the photo of his wife and daughter on the bedside table, both killed 3 years ago when the Zarnians demonstrated their power by destroying a civilian research station near Neptune. His hands trembled slightly as he put the photo in his bag. The message from Admiral Woods had been brief. His engineering expertise was needed for a classified project on Europa, something that might finally give humanity a way to fight back. Back on Europa, Susan's lab had transformed into a hub of frantic activity. Lieutenant Laura Peterson, newly assigned from Earth's Tactical Division, approached Susan with a concerned look. Dr. Taylor, I've reviewed your project files. The theory is sound, but have you considered the ethical implications? This technology doesn't just defeat the enemy. It changes the fundamental rules they operate by. Susan looked up from her work. Lieutenant, I've spent many nights considering those implications. But the Zarnians have given us no choice. It's adapt or die. In orbit around Pluto, the first Zarnian scout ships appeared, earlier than expected. The sensor stations automatically relayed the information back to Earth. Admiral Woods received the alert during the government meeting. His face remained neutral as he read it, but inside, his heart sank. The Zarnians were moving faster than anticipated. Representatives, he announced, interrupting a heated debate. We just lost 2 days of preparation time. The enemy advance fleet has been detected near Pluto. The room fell silent. All defensive options are now on the table, Woods continued. And may God help us if Dr. Taylor's project doesn't work. On Europa, Susan's team worked through the night, racing against time and physics to create humanity's last hope. A weapon unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Susan Taylor gathered her team in the main lab on Europa. 60 pairs of eyes looked at her with a mix of fear and hope. The weight of humanity's future pressed down on her shoulders. The Prometheus Protocol isn't a weapon in the traditional sense, Susan explained, activating a holographic display. It doesn't destroy ships or kill enemies. It changes the rules of physics itself. Lieutenant Laura Peterson frowned. How is that even possible? Susan pointed to strange symbols floating in the hologram. These equations were found on Mars 20 years ago, carved into ruins at least 50,000 years old. They describe a way to alter the fundamental constants of physics within a defined area of space. Sam Martinez, who had arrived just hours ago, stepped forward. You mean like changing the speed of light or how electromagnetism works? Exactly. Susan nodded. The Zarnians rely on energy weapons and shield technology that only function under normal physics. If we change those constants, their technology simply won't work anymore. And ours will. Jack Miller asked from the back of the room. He had been sent by Admiral Woods to evaluate their progress. Susan's face grew serious. That's the challenge. We need to target only the constants that Zarnian technology depends on while leaving other physics intact. The math is complex. In the hours that followed, the team broke into groups. Laura worked with Susan on targeting algorithms. Jack coordinated with Earth's defense satellites. Sam tackled the most critical problem, building a stabilization matrix that could contain the effect to just their solar system. If this spreads beyond what we intend, we could affect other stars, other worlds, Sam warned as he worked. We could become the monsters. Susan knew he was right. The technology they worked with wasn't meant for human hands. The ancient ruins had suggested that the original builders had advanced far beyond current human understanding, but something had destroyed their civilization. Perhaps this very technology. On the third day, disaster struck. During a test run, the main power coupling exploded. 3 scientists were injured, and weeks of work went up in smoke. We need to start over, one of the engineers said, looking at the destruction. We don't have time, Susan replied, her voice firm. The Zarnians will be here in 4 days. That night, while most of the team caught a few hours of sleep, Susan remained in her office, searching for a solution. The equations blurred before her tired eyes. She was missing something important. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Sam, holding 2 cups of coffee. You look like you could use this, he said, handing her one. Susan accepted it gratefully. I can't figure it out. The equations say this should work, but our tests keep failing. Sam looked at her screens. Maybe we're thinking too big. What if we don't need to change all the constants? What if we just target the one that matters most for their shields? Susan's eyes widened. She quickly pulled up new calculations. The Zarnian shields operate on a quantum principle that relies heavily on the fine structure constant. If we adjust just that one, the energy requirement drops by 80%. Sam finished, looking at the numbers. And our conventional weapons might work against them, Susan added, excitement building in her voice. By morning, they had a new plan. Laura worked with Jack to develop a deployment strategy using Earth's defense satellites as a network to distribute the effect. Sam rebuilt the stabilization matrix for the new, more focused approach. When Admiral Woods called for an update, Susan was finally able to give him good news. We can be ready in 3 days, she told him. Make it 2, Woods replied grimly. Our deep space sensors have detected the main Zarnian fleet. They're moving faster than we anticipated. As the call ended, Laura approached Susan with a troubled expression. Dr. Taylor, there's something else you should know. Security found unusual communications coming from the lab. Someone has been sending data off-world. Susan's moment of hope vanished. We have a spy. Security officers surrounded Dr. Alan Price as he tried to delete files from his computer. The older scientist didn't resist when they took him away. Susan watched with disappointment. Alan had been her mentor years ago. Who was he communicating with? Susan asked the security chief. Not the Zarnians. A group calling themselves the Centauri Alliance. They're supposed to be neutral in galactic affairs. Jack Miller frowned. Why would he risk everything to contact them? The security chief played a recording of Alan's message. The weapon they're building could destabilize physics across multiple star systems. This goes beyond human survival. The galaxy itself could be at risk. Susan felt her stomach tighten. Was Alan right? Could the Prometheus Protocol cause more harm than good? We don't have time for doubts, Laura reminded her. 2 days until the Zarnians arrive. We need to finish the targeting system. Susan nodded and returned to work, but Alan's warning echoed in her mind. That afternoon, while testing the new targeting algorithms, Susan noticed something strange in the data. The effect wasn't spreading evenly as expected. It concentrated at certain points, creating dangerous instabilities. The field is collapsing on itself, she muttered, studying the readouts. Sam looked over her shoulder. That shouldn't happen according to the Mars equations. Susan suddenly remembered something from the ancient ruins, symbols they hadn't fully translated. She pulled up the original images on her tablet. These weren't mathematical notations like we thought, she said excitedly. They're warnings about field resonance. The effect needs to be applied in a specific pattern. Working through the night, Susan rewrote the targeting protocol. Instead of trying to blanket the solar system with the effect, they would create a network of precisely placed nodes, each one shifting the physics in a small area, but together creating a stable field. It's like acupuncture for space-time, Laura said as she helped map the pattern. Meanwhile, Sam discovered another problem. The stabilization matrix would need constant adjustment once activated. The original builders probably had advanced AI to handle this, but humans had no such technology. I'll have to do it manually, Sam decided, designing a control interface. That's too dangerous, Susan protested. You'd be exposed to radiation and temporal fluctuations. Sam looked at the photo of his family he kept in his pocket. I've got nothing to lose, Doc. On Earth, Admiral Woods received the final battle plans. Commander Miller would lead a small fleet to engage the Zarnian vanguard, buying time for the Prometheus Protocol to activate. It was essentially a suicide mission. The civilian evacuation of the outer colonies is only 50% complete, his aide reported. We need more time. Time is the one thing we don't have, Woods replied grimly. Back on Europa, the team made final preparations. The defense satellites throughout the solar system had been reprogrammed to create the network of physics-altering nodes. Each one was precisely calibrated to affect only the fine structure constant that Zarnian shields relied upon. Laura worked with Earth's military to coordinate the timing. Once we activate the protocol, Miller's fleet will have approximately 20 minutes to strike before the Zarnians realize what's happening. As Sam finished the control interface, he asked Susan, "Do you think Alan was right? Could this damage the galaxy?" Susan looked at the calculations one last time. The effect should be contained to our solar system. Beyond that, I honestly don't know. The alarm sounded. The Zarnian fleet had been detected crossing Neptune's orbit, hours ahead of schedule. They would reach Earth in less than a day. It's time, Susan said. Ready or not, we have to deploy the protocol now. As the team rushed to their stations, a message came through from Admiral Woods. The Zarnian High Commander has opened a channel. He wants to deliver his terms personally. The main screen in Earth's command center showed the face of High Commander Krax. His gray skin had a metallic shine. 4 yellow eyes blinked independently as he studied the humans before him. Admiral Woods stood tall, keeping his face calm despite his fear. Your species has shown remarkable resistance, Krax said, his voice translated by computers. Most races surrender immediately when they see our fleet. Humans are stubborn, Woods replied. We don't give up our homes easily. Krax made a sound like metal scraping against stone. A Zarnian laugh. Your courage is noted, but meaningless. Our scans show your weapons cannot harm our ships. You have 6 hours to begin evacuation of your colonies. Any human found beyond your home planet after that time will be eliminated. The transmission ended abruptly. Woods turned to his officers. Status of the Prometheus Protocol. Dr. Taylor reports they're ready for activation, sir. They're just waiting for Commander Miller's fleet to get into position. Woods nodded. Tell Miller he has 3 hours to execute his part of the plan. On Europa, Susan made final adjustments to the equipment. The device at the center of the lab didn't look impressive, just a sphere of metal and crystal, connected to dozens of cables. But within it was technology that could reshape the laws of physics. All defense satellites are online and responding, Laura reported. The network is ready. Sam worked on the control interface, programming the precise changes needed for the fine structure constant. If this works, the Zarnian shields will fail instantly. Their weapons will lose coherence. And if it doesn't work? Laura asked quietly. Then humanity joins 17 other extinct species, Susan replied. In space, Commander Jack Miller led 43 ships toward the massive Zarnian fleet. His was a desperate mission: to engage the enemy and draw their attention while the protocol activated. Few of his crew expected to survive. All ships, maintain formation. Jack ordered. Remember your training. Once their shields fail, aim for their propulsion systems. His second-in-command, a young woman named Kate Johnson, looked at him. Do you really think this secret weapon will work, sir? Jack watched the enemy fleet grow larger on his screen. Over 300 Zarnian warships, each one capable of destroying several human vessels. It has to work, Lieutenant. We've run out of other options. Across the solar system, people huddled in shelters or watched news feeds. Some prayed, others prepared for the end. In New Washington, crowds gathered in parks, wanting to see the sky one last time if this was to be their final day. On a small farm in what was once called Kansas, an old man refused to enter the community shelter. I was born under this sky, he told his neighbors. If it's my time to go, I'll go looking at the clouds. Back on Europa, Susan received word that Commander Miller's fleet had engaged the Zarnian vanguard. It's time, she said. Start the activation sequence. Laura began the countdown. Satellite network alignment at 95%. Defense grid is ready. Sam took his position at the control interface, placing his hands on the 2 metal spheres that would let him make manual adjustments. Matrix stabilizers online, ready for activation. Susan looked at the faces of her team. Some showed fear, others determination. All knew that what they did today would either save humanity or fail completely. There would be no middle ground. Initiating Prometheus Protocol in 3, 2, 1. Susan pressed her palm against the activation panel. The sphere in the center of the lab began to glow with a strange, shifting light that seemed to bend around itself. The room filled with a high-pitched hum. In space, Commander Miller watched as the first wave of Zarnian destroyers opened fire. Brilliant beams of energy lanced toward his ships. Evasive maneuvers, he ordered. Hold formation as long as possible. On his command ship's bridge, warning alarms blared as Zarnian weapons found their targets. 3 human vessels erupted into flames, their crews lost in an instant. Jack gripped his chair. Come on, Susan, he whispered. We need that miracle now. On Europa, the Prometheus device pulsed with energy. The lab's lights flickered and dimmed. Warning messages flashed across Susan's screens. Power fluctuation in the main grid. One of the engineers shouted, We're losing stability. Susan watched the energy readings spike dangerously. Redirect power from the backup systems. We need more juice. Sam's hands moved frantically over the control interface. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he fought to keep the matrix stable. His skin had begun to redden from the radiation exposure. The pattern isn't holding, he called out, his voice strained. Field integrity dropping to 60%. Laura worked at her station, coordinating with the satellite network. 3 satellites in Sector 7 are offline. The network has gaps. Susan made a quick decision. Reroute through the secondary nodes. We don't need complete coverage. We just need enough to affect their ships. In space, Commander Miller watched as another human ship exploded. His fleet was down to 37 vessels now. The Zarnian weapons were too powerful, their shields too strong. Sir, The Zarnian flagship is moving into firing position. They're targeting Earth's defense station, Lieutenant Johnson reported. Jack felt his heart sink. The defense station housed thousands of people and coordinated Earth's entire defensive grid. If it fell, their organized resistance would collapse. All ships, focus fire on the flagship, he ordered, knowing it was probably useless against the Zarnian shields. Buy time, people. That's our job now. On Earth, Admiral Woods received the grim reports. Miller's fleet was being decimated. The Zarnian flagship was positioning to destroy their main defense station. Any word from Europa? He asked. Protocol activation in progress, sir, but they're reporting severe power issues. Woods closed his eyes briefly. Tell them to do whatever it takes. The fate of our species depends on it. Back on Europa, the situation was becoming desperate. The lab's main power regulators had overloaded and burned out. The backup systems were straining to maintain the energy flow to the Prometheus device. The field is collapsing. Sam shouted. His hands were now blistering from the radiation, but he refused to let go of the control spheres. We need more power to complete the pattern. Susan looked around frantically. They had used every power source available. Then her eyes fell on the station's emergency fusion reactor, a separate system meant to keep life support running if all else failed. Laura, reroute the emergency fusion reactor to the main grid, she ordered. But that's against safety protocols, Laura protested. It could cause a cascade failure in the entire station. If we fail, everyone dies anyway, Susan said firmly. Do it. Laura nodded and began the emergency override procedures. As she worked, alarm sirens blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights bathed everything in a crimson glow. Sam groaned as the radiation exposure increased. The skin on his hands was starting to blister and peel, but he maintained his grip on the control spheres. Almost there, he muttered through clenched teeth. Just a little longer. In space, the Zarnian flagship's main weapon began to glow with gathering energy. The massive cannon was pointed directly at Earth's defense station. Commander Miller's ships fired everything they had at the flagship, but their weapons bounced harmlessly off its shields. This is it, Jack thought, watching the enemy weapon charge. He had failed. They had all failed. Then something strange happened. A wave of distortion, invisible but somehow still perceptible, rippled through space. For a moment, everything seemed to shimmer, as if reality itself was being rewritten. The Zarnian flagship fired its main cannon, and nothing happened. The weapon powered up, glowed brightly, but no destructive beam emerged. On board the Zarnian vessels, confusion spread. Across their fleet, weapons suddenly failed to fire. Shield indicators dropped to zero. Communication systems emitted only static. Jack stared in disbelief at his sensors. What just happened? Lieutenant Johnson looked up from her station, her eyes wide with amazement. Sir, the Zarnian shields. They're down. All of them. For a moment, Jack couldn't process what she was saying. Then understanding dawned, and with it, hope. All ships, he ordered, his voice steady and clear. Target Zarnian engines and weapons. Fire at will. The human fleet fired their weapons at the suddenly vulnerable Zarnian ships. Missiles and kinetic rounds that once bounced harmlessly off shields now tore through alien hulls. Explosions bloomed in the darkness of space as vessel after vessel took critical damage. On his command ship, Jack Miller couldn't believe what he was seeing. The mighty Zarnian fleet was in chaos. Their ships drifted aimlessly or spun out of control. Target their propulsion systems, Jack ordered. Disable rather than destroy when possible. Lieutenant Johnson looked at him. Sir, they're defenseless now, Jack explained. We don't need to slaughter them. In the Zarnian flagship, High Commander Krax roared in anger and confusion. His officers frantically worked at their control panels, trying to restore power to their shields and weapons. What human trickery is this? Krax demanded. Restore our systems immediately. We cannot, High Commander, his science officer reported. Something has changed. The physical constants our technology relies upon have been altered. Krax's 4 yellow eyes widened. That's impossible. No species has that capability. The humans have done the impossible, the science officer said simply. On Europa, Susan watched the data feeds with a mixture of relief and awe. The Prometheus protocol had worked beyond their expectations. The field had stabilized across the entire solar system, creating a new set of physical laws that rendered Zarnian technology useless while leaving human weapons operational. "We did it," Laura whispered, looking at the battle reports. "Their entire fleet is disabled." Sam slumped in his chair, finally releasing his grip on the control spheres. His hands were badly burned, skin peeling away in layers. Medical staff rushed to his side. "Worth it," he muttered as they treated his injuries. "Totally worth it." Susan checked the field stability readings. "The effect is holding steady. The changes we made to the fine structure constant are maintaining within acceptable parameters." One of the engineers looked up from his station. "What about ships trying to escape? Will their faster-than-light drives work?" Susan shook her head. "Not likely. The Zarnian FTL technology relies on the same constants we altered. They're trapped in our solar system now." On Earth, Admiral Woods received the reports with growing amazement. The impossible had happened. The mighty Zarnian fleet, which had conquered 17 other species, was helpless before them. "Open a channel to High Commander Krax," he ordered. When Krax's face appeared on screen, the alien's usual arrogance was gone. In its place was something humans had never seen in a Zarnian before: fear. "Your terms were unacceptable to us," Woods said calmly. "Now I will offer you terms instead. Your fleet will power down all remaining systems. Your crews will prepare for boarding by human forces. Any resistance will be met with immediate destruction." Krax's metallic voice sounded hollow. "How did you do this? What weapon have you used against us?" Woods smiled slightly. "Let's just say we changed the rules of the game." Across the solar system, humans emerged from shelters and safe rooms to hear the news. Earth's communication networks buzzed with reports of the unexpected victory. People who had prepared for extinction now celebrated survival. In New Washington, crowds filled the streets, waving flags and embracing strangers. On the farm in Kansas, the old man who had refused shelter looked up at the blue sky and nodded, as if he had never doubted the outcome. Among the Jupiter colonies, children were let out of underground bunkers to see the moons and stars again. Parents held them close, grateful for the future they now had. On Europa, Susan and her team monitored the Prometheus field carefully. The effect remained stable, contained within the solar system as they had hoped. Their calculations had been correct. They had changed physics itself, but only in their small corner of the galaxy. "What happens now?" Laura asked, looking at the data showing hundreds of disabled Zarnian ships. Susan turned to her, exhaustion and triumph mixing on her face. "Now we deal with the consequences of being the most powerful species in this part of the galaxy." In the medical bay, Sam watched the celebration from his bed. The doctors had said his hands would heal, though it would take time. Looking at the joy around him, he decided it had been a fair trade. His family would have been proud. 2 weeks after the battle, Earth's unified government held an emergency session. Representatives from all human colonies gathered to discuss their new position in the galaxy. Admiral Woods stood before them, his face serious despite the victory. "The Zarnian fleet has been fully secured," he reported. "High Commander Krax and his officers are in custody. Their crews have been surprisingly cooperative once they realized their situation." "What about the other species under Zarnian control?" asked the representative from Mars. "That's why I'm here today," Woods replied. "We've received communication requests from 17 different species. Word of our victory has spread faster than we expected." In a secure meeting room nearby, Susan Taylor met with a delegation from the Centauri Alliance. The aliens looked nearly human except for their silvery skin and large, dark eyes. Their leader, Ambassador Pell, studied Susan carefully. Our scientists believed the physics-altering technology was only theoretical, Pell said. The ancient builders left warnings in their ruins about its dangers. Susan nodded. We found similar warnings on Mars. That's why we limited the effect to specific constants and contained it within our solar system. For now, Pell replied. But what happens when your military wants to expand the effect? To use it against other enemies? Susan had no answer. It was a question that had kept her awake many nights. On a Zarnian prison ship, now under human control, Jack Miller interviewed High Commander Krax. The once proud alien sat hunched in his cell, his metallic skin dulled. We didn't develop the technology ourselves, Krax admitted after hours of questioning. We found it, just as you did. In ruins on worlds we conquered. Jack leaned forward. What ruins? Built by whom? We don't know, Krax said. They were gone long before our species achieved spaceflight. We called them the predecessors. The same ruins found on Mars, Jack realized. Were they on all 17 worlds you conquered? Krax's 4 eyes blinked slowly. Yes, each world had ruins. Each had pieces of advanced technology. We took what we found and built our empire with it. Back on Earth, a secret meeting took place between Admiral Woods and representatives from 3 of the species formerly under Zarnian control. The aliens had managed to smuggle themselves to Earth through lesser-known space lanes. Our worlds are still controlled by Zarnian governors, explained a small, furry alien named Tick. With their main fleet trapped in your system, our people could rise up and take back our planets. But we would need help, added another alien with blue scales and 6 limbs. We need the same weapon you used against the Zarnian fleet. Woods frowned. The Prometheus Protocol is not something we can easily share. It's dangerous and not fully understood. Without it, we remain slaves, Tick insisted. With it, we could be free. On Europa, Laura and her team continued studying the ancient equations. With the immediate crisis over, they had time to translate more of the symbols found in the Mars ruins. Look at this section, Laura told Susan, pointing to a series of symbols. It's not about the technology itself. It's a historical record. Susan studied the translation. It says the builders used this technology against their enemies, but it led to their own destruction. How? Laura frowned. According to this, they used it too widely. They changed too many constants across too many star systems. It created a cascade effect they couldn't control. A warning for us, Susan said quietly. In the medical facility where Sam recovered, a nurse brought him a message. It was from a family on one of the outer colonies, people who would have died if the Zarnians had won. They named their newborn daughter Samantha. The nurse told him, smiling, "In your honor." Sam looked at the picture of the tiny baby and felt tears in his eyes. Perhaps this was why he had survived. To see what humanity would do with its second chance. Across the galaxy, news of the Zarnian defeat spread from world to world. Species that had lived in fear for generations dared to hope again. And on distant planets, in ancient ruins similar to those on Mars, lights that had been dormant for millennia began to glow once more. 6 months after humanity's victory over the Zarnians, Earth had become the center of a new galactic order. Ships from dozens of worlds arrived daily, seeking trade, alliance, or simply to see the species that had defeated the mighty Zarnian dominion. Jack Miller, now Admiral Miller, stood on the observation deck of Earth's new diplomatic station. Below him, representatives from 23 alien species gathered for a historic meeting. "Never thought I'd see the day," said Laura, who had become his chief advisor on alien affairs. 6 months ago, we were facing extinction. Now we're hosting a galactic peace conference. Jack nodded. Power changes everything. The question is whether we use it wisely. On Europa, the research facility had grown into a massive complex. Scientists from Earth worked alongside carefully selected alien researchers to better understand the Prometheus technology. Susan Taylor led the international team, determined to learn from the mistakes of the ancient builders. "We've translated another section of the Mars ruins," an assistant told her, bringing a tablet with the latest findings. "It mentions other sites across the galaxy with more advanced technology." Susan studied the information with concern. If the ruins on Mars contained world-changing technology, what might be found in these other locations? At a secure Earth facility, Sam Martinez had recovered from his injuries. His new role involved working with representatives from the formerly subjugated species. Today he met with delegates from 6 worlds, each one recently liberated from Zarnian control. "The Prometheus Protocol worked perfectly in our system," said a tall, thin alien with feathered skin. "The Zarnian garrison surrendered without a fight when their weapons failed. Humanity had carefully shared modified versions of the technology with trusted allies, versions that could only affect limited areas and specific constants. It was enough to free the occupied worlds without risking the galactic instability that Susan feared." "How are your people adjusting to freedom?" Sam asked. "After 300 years of Zarnian rule, it is challenging," the alien admitted. "But we are learning. Your species is helping us remember who we were before the conquest." In the deep space beyond Neptune, Admiral Woods oversaw the construction of Earth's new defense perimeter. Dozens of satellites were being positioned, creating a network that could activate the Prometheus effect at a moment's notice if new threats emerged. "The Centauri Alliance reports increased activity in Sector 9, his aide informed him. "Unknown ships moving along the old Zarnian trade routes." Woods frowned. "Keep monitoring them and accelerate the satellite deployment schedule." Despite their victory, Woods knew humanity's position remained precarious. They had power now, but power attracted both allies and enemies. In his private quarters on Earth, High Commander Krax lived in comfortable containment. Unlike many Zarnians who had been repatriated to a designated colony world, Krax remained as a cultural advisor to human leaders. "You've changed the balance of the galaxy," he told Admiral Miller during a regular consultation. "But you haven't considered what that might awaken." "What do you mean?" Jack asked. Krax's yellow eyes narrowed. "Why do you think the predecessors vanished? What force was strong enough to wipe out a civilization that could rewrite physics itself?" On a distant world, far beyond human exploration, lights continued to activate in long-buried ruins. Ancient machines hummed to life, responding to the energy signature of the Prometheus Protocol. In a chamber deep below the surface, a stasis pod began its awakening sequence. On Earth, Susan Taylor woke suddenly from a troubled sleep. The equations from the Mars ruins swirled in her mind, forming a new pattern she hadn't seen before. She rushed to her computer and began typing rapidly. Hours later, she stared at her screen in disbelief. The ancient builders hadn't destroyed themselves after all. They had gone into hiding, burying their technology across dozens of worlds. And now, because of what humanity had done, they were waking up. Susan reached for her communicator. "Get me Admiral Woods immediately," she said, her voice urgent. "We may have made a terrible mistake." In the vastness of space, something ancient and powerful stirred. Humanity had changed the galactic balance overnight, but they weren't the first to wield this power, and perhaps not the last. The true test of their species was just beginning.